If you have installed OpenClaw but you feel like it lacks real power, or you need a feature that's not part of the default installation yet, then this video is for you. Because today we are going to build our own plugin, which is just a small code module that extends the OpenClaw features for yourself, to share with the community, or to sell as premium extensions. I will show you how to build a custom plugin, how to package it, how to install it, and eventually run it on your own OpenClaw instance. And on top of that, I will share all the plugin code so that you can use it to create your own plugin. So with that said, let's get started. Alright, so before we jump into the actual code, I want to mention that there is also official documentation, and I will put the link in the description. I will not go through the whole document. However, I will use it as a reference, and so can you once we are building our own plugin. Now, before we jump into the code, I want to mention some of the things that are stated here. And as you can see, these plugins, they are small code module that extends the OpenClaw basic features. And that's why it is so powerful, because we can add our own logic, our own code to the basic features from OpenClaw that are already there. Now, there are some comments that we can use to list these available plugins. Also, that we are going to do once we drop our own plugin on the machine to see if our plugin is there and also if it is enabled properly. Now, besides that, they have some available plugins which they call official plugins. They are there out of the box. Now, the great thing is that you can look at the source code of these plugins and see how things are done by these other plugins, which they call available official plugins. Now, more important, we need that plugin manifest, and every plugin needs that. It is also part of our code base, so we will look at that. Now, it's nothing more than just a document that describes more information about our plugin, and it is a JSON document that is required because I believe it is used once it's loaded in the runtime by a GT. Now, these OpenClaw plugins, they are just TypeScript modules, and that's great because we work a lot with TypeScript, and they allow us to register things like gateway RPC methods, gateway HTTP handlers, agent tools, CLI comments, background services, optional config validation, skills even, and also auto reply comments, which are just slash comments that we can use to provide more info about our plugin without invoking the actual AI agent. Now, this is great, and we are going to look at these once we are building our plugin. We are going to register some of them, and again, more information about all these are further along the documentation, and I will also share that link with you. So now that you know that the documentation is there, let's waste no more time and jump straight into our codebase. Alright, so this is our codebase for today, and as you can see, this is just a regular TypeScript project. We will go through all the files which are required to create a valid OpenClaw plugin. And once we have done that, we will install it on our OpenClaw instance, and then we will interact with our plugin, and then we might come back to our codebase to see which component is doing the actual interaction at that time. Now, besides that, I'm also connected to my VPS, as you can see here, and I have installed the latest version of OpenClaw, which is 2026 2.25. Now, besides that, I have set up one channel, which is Telegram, which I can also use to interact with my bot. And as you can see, this is just a fresh installation. It just came online. So if you want to follow along, you can install OpenClaw from scratch. And also for that, I have a video. I will put the link in the description where we install OpenClaw on a VPS in a secure way. So if you follow along with that video, then you will have the exact same setup as I have here today. So with that said, let's check out our code base. And once we have done that, we will deploy it on the machine and start interacting with our plugin. Alright, so let's start at the beginning so we can scroll down a bit this and have a look at the package.json file. So this is quite similar to, for example, a TypeScript project where we have that package.json file where we have additional information about our code base, the dependencies, dev dependencies, and also here you can see that we specify OpenClaw and where that extension starts. So this is pointing to the index.ts file. Now, as a reminder, you can also download this code base. The link will be in the description. So if you don't want to type this yourself, you can always copy the code base and start from there. Now, as you can see here, we import, for example, things from OpenClaw, and we will also do that in the index.ts file, where we use functions and also types that come with the plugin SDK. Now, the plugin SDK, which is from OpenClaw, lives on our machine and comes with the default installation of OpenClaw. Now, what you can always do is download or pull that repository, the official OpenClaw repository, and then under source, you will also find the plugin SDK, as you can see here. So you can always use that as a reference if you want to. The great thing is it also includes these extensions that we talked about earlier, these default plugins that they advertise on their documentation, and also that you can use to look at these plugins on how they are built. So if we look at, for example, the voice call plugin, which they had in their documentation, you can also click on the index.ts file here and see how they built their plugin. So also that is a great reference. So you can just pull in this OpenClaw repository. I'll also put the link in the description if you want to do so. It's a great source of information to reference once you are building your plugins. All right, so back to our project. Now, besides that, we have this OpenClaw plugin JSON file. Remember, we talked about that earlier. It's this plugin manifest that we need to have in order for our plugin to be discovered. So if we go back to the plugins documentation real quick, I believe it's stated here somewhere that we needed this plugin manifest. So if you click on that, here you can read more about that file, about the values that are required and also additional ones. So that is the file that I refer to here in our code base. So back to our code base better, that's this OpenClaw plugin.json. And as you can see here, we have an ID, the name, the description of our plugin, the version, also UI hints, and these are just used to render our UI configuration options in the gateway dashboard. And I will show you in a minute what that does. And then besides that, we can also point at a skills document, which is living in the skills folder. As you can see here, this is just a skill MD that you can additionally provide, and that also the LLM or your OpenClaw can use to interact with your plugin if you want to do so. Now, besides that, you have a config schema, and you can look at all these values, what they refer to. Again, once again, if you look at the plugin manifest information here, you have all these values, and also here it says the config schema. So you can read through all these, what they do and what they are used for, and of course, which are required and which are not. Now, besides that, we have the properties here, and as you can see, they refer to the UI hints. And the UI hints, once again, we will use these UI hints to render a GUI in the OpenClaw gateway dashboard, and then they refer to the properties. And we will only have two configuration options in our plugin. It's a really simple plugin. We are going to fetch resources from X402, and X402 is just a payment standard. In other words, we are just going to fetch a URL and it will return to us some information, and that information happens to be X402 endpoints, and that's why this plugin is called X402. But you could fetch anything. You could fetch, for example, trending tokens, you could fetch the weather, it doesn't matter. That's why I call this plugin X402. And what we have here is the enablement of that plugin. So we have a option enable, which is a boolean, true or false, and we have that API endpoint, which is a string, which is actually the link that we are going to use to fetch these resources. So that is the OpenClaw plugin.json file that is required and that you need to have, as we saw earlier in the documentation. Now, real quick, I will show you what these UI hints do. So if you have the OpenClaw dashboard open here, so this is exposed at port 18789 by default. This is the OpenClaw gateway dashboard, and you can use it to check out logs, to config your OpenClaw instance. Under config, you can scroll down and here you can see plugins and then plugin entries, and these are all these default plugins, also the one that we saw in the repository. And you can, for example, click on one and then you can see here phone control config. And here, these are the options for this specific plugin. Now, once we install our own plugin, it will also be listed here. And if we click on our plugin, we will see these configuration options and it will say enable, disable. And it will also have that API endpoint URL string field in here that we can use to configure and set the endpoint for our fetch. So that's what these UI hints do. So if we go back to our code base real quick, that is why these UI hints are there, and also they refer to the properties, and we will only have two enabled and the API endpoint. All right, so next let's have a look at our index.ts file. So of course on top we have our imports just as we do in any other TypeScript project. And then we also have the export of the actual plugin. So we are exporting this plugin. Now to start, what we do here is get that schema in, and we have a constant for that which built a object, and here we resolve that plugin config. So this is also an additional function which is stored under config.ts, and what we do here is just build that default config. And also here you can see we have that enable option and then that API endpoint, and this is the API endpoint or the link that we will use to fetch these resources available with X402. But this could be anything. If you want to fetch other information via API, you can do that. You just have to make sure that you fetch a other resource. Now, if we don't provide any plugin config, it will just return the default config. Otherwise, it will try to parse that and then once again return a resolved plugin config. And that's what we see here. So back in the index.ts file, it will return that config for us. And also here we specify these UI ints enabled and the API endpoint. And it also says here what it does. So you can always change this to make it more suitable for the plugin that you are building. All right, so let's continue and have a look at our actual plugin. So this is the name of our plugin. Once again, we have an ID, name, and a description, and then that config schema that we just created here on top. And then we are going to register an actual plugin. So that you can see here, we have register, and we are going to register a OpenClaw Plugin API. So that's what we do here. Now, first we are going to set the runtime, and we just have a helper function for that. That is also stored here under runtime. And this is just a singleton that we can use to set the plugin runtime and also get the plugin runtime. And that is helpful. For example, if we are going to send messages to a certain channel, which you will see in a minute, then we can access that runtime. So back to our plugin here, we are going to set the config. Once again, we load in the config via that plugin config schema, and we're going to parse that. And here we're using Zot. Remember, Zot is just a library that can be used to validate forms, to validate information that we want to parse. So that's what we do here. So we always know that we have a valid config schema. Then we are going to validate that schema. Once again, it's really important that our schema is valid, that it has the right options. We do that with a function here, validate config, and it's also under config here. We're just going to parse this schema, and if it's good, we're going to return that it is valid without errors. Otherwise, we are going to throw errors. We always want to make sure that we have a valid schema for our plugin. So if it's not valid, we're going to output a log. As you can see here, we use the API logger function, and we're going to output a warning. And also that we can see in these logs in the gateway dashboard. So we're also going to look at that later. Now, besides that, we also want to make sure that our plugin is enabled, because if not, we're just going to output in our log that the plugin is disabled and that it will no longer continue with the registration of our plugin. Now, if it is not disabled, we can continue, and then we will also check here. So the API logger, it will now output like, hey, we are initializing this plugin, and we can also output some debug information. So that's what we do here. So all these statements that you can see here, API logger info, API logger debug, we also had here API logger info, once again, API logger warn. These logs are being sent to the log collector. And if you go back to that dashboard, the OpenClaw Gateway dashboard, under logs, you can see here all these logs, and here you can see trace, debug, info, warn, error. So you can see all these logs here that we're sending back to the OpenClaw Gateway. You can also see here where they are stored. So if you want to raw inspect these logs, you can always do that at this location. All right, so let's continue. The next thing that we are going to do is register all these different tools that we can register. So once again, if we have a look at the actual plugin documentation, you could see here that we could register all kinds of stuff like a gateway RPC method, gateway HTTP handlers, agent tools, CLI comments, background services, skills, and auto reply comments. And that is what we are doing here now. So you can see we are registering a gateway method, a register a CLI comment, a tool, a service, a comment. We register a hook, as you can see here. So this is what we are doing here. So let's have a look at the first one once again. So what we do here, we expose or we create that gateway method. And that gateway method, once that is interacted with, it can use this functionality, or it will use this functionality better. And what that will do is fetch our resources. And for that, we have a function called fetch discovery resources, and that is here under utils. And what this will do is nothing more than just doing a fetch to our API endpoint. Remember, we're just fetching information from a API endpoint. And I can show you how that looks. For example, if we open Postman and then we do a new get method, that is the same link that was specified in our configuration. So if I send now that get request, you can see that it returns to me all these resources that we can use to pay over the X402 payment protocol. Again, this could be everything. We're just fetching information that we want to pull into our OpenClaw instance. So that's all it does. So that's what we do here. We fetch that information and then we are going to return that. So if the response is okay, we are going to return that data. And then we have that data here. And then we're also going to format that data. And for that, we also have a function. And as you can see, this is just regular TypeScript. We have functions that we can use to provide data, as you can see here. And then we're going to format that. We're going to loop through all this information that we get back from that fetch, and then we're going to output that neatly. We're going to specify the resource, the URL, the type, when it was last updated, and that you can also see here. Once again, we have all that information here that we can work with. However, we don't want to output everything, and that's why we have that function here that we can get that data, and then we're going to format it to actually return it into a proper way. We're going to return that result in a way that we want it to be formatted. So this is nothing more than just a formatting function, and that's what we do here. So once we have that formatted response, we're going to respond with that, and as you can see here, what we do, we respond, we set the success to true, the actual information, and then also a timestamp. So this is how our gateway can interact with our plugin, because we registered that gateway method. Now we can also register other things, like for example a CLI comment. As you can see here, we have a specific function for that, register CLI. So that we specified here under the CLI.ts. What we do here is just creating a comment structure, and our base comment will be X402. So we will be able to write something like OpenClaw X402 and then a subcommand, for example, discover. That's what we declare here. So we have our root command, which is X402. Then we have discover, we have a description. And once again, it does the same logic here. So once this is triggered, this comment, OpenClaw X402 discover, and we will look at that in a minute once we deployed our plugin, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to fetch these resources, it's going to format the resources, and it's going to output that in our OpenClaw instance, because that's what we are going to type here, something like this, OpenClaw, and then X402, like this, and then discover. And if we press enter, it will console log this same output in our console here. So that's what we are registering here with this CLI comment. So back to our index file. Once again, we can also register a tool, and this tool can be used by our LLM. So if we talk to our LLM in our chat, in our, for example, our Telegram chat, we can just refer to this tool. We can say, hey, the X402_discover tool, use that tool now and give me the output. So our LLM will exactly know what to do. It will refer to this tool, as you can see here. It will once again use these two functions here, the resources, format the resources, and of course we need to return it in a certain way, but that is all documented. And then our LLM will know what to do and how to use this tool. Also, all that you can specify in the skills document, and your OpenClaw will have a new skill and exactly know how to interact with it. Now, besides that, we can register a service, also that if we want to run a service on our VPS, for example. Now we have really simple instructions here. Once it starts, we're going to output a message in our logs, and once it stops. But also here you can add additional logic. It depends all on what kind of plugin you are building. I'm just running through all the things that we can register. And we can also register a comment, and this is just a slash comment that we can use in order to provide some info. Now, once we use this slash comment here, like if I have, for example, this Telegram window here, what I can do is type X402, now it's not registered yet, and then info. And if I press enter, then this is just a slash comment that we can use to also talk to our plugin. Now this slash comment is without talking to the actual LLM, so it will just interact with our plugin and it will return us information. And this time, once we use this slash comment, it will return to us the current source location of the X402 plugin is this, so it will output the link that we're trying to fetch from. And then also it says here, the plugin is designed to fetch discovery resources for this endpoint, and you can also change the plugin configuration if needed. So this is just a slash command that we register here to interact with our plugin. And then besides that, we also have hooks, and there is the documentation that we can specify a hook this way, like API register hook, and then we can say message received. This is documented, however, it's not working, and I created an issue for that on the OpenClaw repository for that. However, it's still open and not resolved, and that's why I have this alternative here. And this hook, what this will do is every time there is a message sent to our gateway via, for example, WhatsApp, for example, Discord, Telegram, we will look in a minute how that works. It's going to capture that message, and then we can inspect what that message is about. And if that message contains X402, then we're also going to respond within that same conversation that we're going to respond with like, hey, I detected a message mentioning X402. We have a dedicated tool for that called X402 Discover. And you can also send this comment. So if our user is talking, for example, or someone else is talking with that LLM and they mention X402, then we're just going to insert in that conversation a quick message like, hey, do you know we have this tool? And for debug purposes, I'm also outputting in our logger, once that inbound message is received, the context of that message and the actual event. And here you can see we are getting our current runtime. Remember, we set that runtime earlier. We have that singleton here. And now instead of setting it, we are getting the runtime. And the runtime is needed here because we need to set that channel that we want to send that outbound message to. And the channel ID we just get from the actual context, as you can see here, once that hook was received. But instead of creating the logic for each channel, we're having this function here where we take that channel ID and then we build it our own ways, so it's a bit more flexible for any other channels that we want to use. And then we use that method here. We can set a from, we can set the response text. As I said earlier, we detected a message mentioning X402, and then also the account ID, so we know exactly where our runtime needs to send that message to, so it is inserted in the actual right conversation. Now, once again, there is another way to do that. There is another way to register a hook, but this is not working as of now. Once that issue is closed and there is a solution for it, it might work. So, but for now, it's just commented out here, as you can use it as a reference. So this is how our plugin is built. As I said, it's a really small code base, and it all comes down to having the right configurations files, like for example, the package.json, the OpenClaw plugin, the manifest, as we spoke about earlier, and then just register your plugin. And then within this plugin registration, you need to register all these different methods that you want to expose in your plugin, like for example, these slash commands, the actual commands, the gateway methods, the services, the hooks. It's nothing more than that. And then once you register these, you just have to create your logic and return the data that comes out of your logic back to the appropriate runtime or channel or conversation. It depends, of course, on what type of interaction you are registering here. But I hope you understand the overall setup of the plugin. And once we install the plugin and we are going to interact with it, we will come back to the code base, so it will make a bit more sense. All right, so now that we have our plugin, let's copy it to our machine. Let's install it, enable it, and then we will start interacting with it. Alright, so in order to drop our plugin on our machine and install it, I have this README here that you can follow. I believe you can also install it using the plugins install command, but that is only for official plugins, I believe. Now, what we are going to do first is make a directory. It might be that this directory is not there. If you already have other plugins installed, it will be there. Nevertheless, you can just copy this command and then run it, and this will just create a extensions directory within your OpenClaw installation. So if you paste this now we have that OpenClaw/extensions folder, and then we're also going to just create a plugins folder in our user directory. So now we're in that user directory. If I list now all the folders and files, you can see here plugins. Now the next thing that we're going to do is copy the actual plugin from our local machine into our VPS. Now again, you can use Git for that if you want to. You can use any method. For now, for the purpose of this video, I'm just copying these files into my VPS so that I can install them and test them really quick. For that, I have a other PowerShell window, as you can see here, so I can paste that. And what this will do is just use SCP. So it's going to copy these files over SSH, and I specify where these files are located. So that is these files here, as you can see, and then I specify where it needs to copy them to. So trader at, and this is my VPS IP, and I say that it needs to copy these files to the user folder and then the plugins folder within that user folder. And if I do this enter now, I specify my passphrase for my SSH key, it will start copying all these files. So once again on my machine, if I list now these plugins here, you can see that we have one folder called X402, and also that we can list plugins 402. And you can see these are all the files here that we just copied from our machine onto that VPS. All right, so let's make this a bit bigger. The next thing that we can do is actually copy these files from our VPS to the extensions folder that we created. And also this, you can just copy that comment, paste it, and now we copied this plugin into our OpenClaw instance. And the next thing that we are going to do is go to that location, so we can do this step by step. Let's go to that location. Now we are in our OpenClaw instance. As you can see, if we type pwd, we are in home, trader, OpenClaw extensions, then in X402. Then we're just going to npm install this, just as we would install any other TypeScript package or codebase if we want to run it. So we do npm install, it goes and gets all these dependencies that are needed to make sure that our plugin can run. All right, so once this is installed, you get a similar message. And for now, we can ignore all the vulnerabilities. Of course, we need to make sure if we create these plugins that they are secure. So what I will do now is just clear our window. And the next thing that we are going to do is OpenClaw, just like this, gateway, then restart. As you can see, this will restart our gateway. And as you can see here, it will just say restart system service, OpenClaw gateway service. So that's fine. So once that is restarted, what we need to do now is go into that OpenClaw config JSON. So if we go one step back, or two steps back better, if you list these files, you will see here a OpenClaw JSON, and that holds the configuration of our OpenClaw installation. Now, a better way what we can do is go to the actual dashboard. Remember this dashboard that we have here, the OpenClaw gateway dashboard. We can then go to config. Then under config, we can scroll down all the way, and then we find plugins. And then under plugin entries, you should see now that plugin that we created. So if we scroll down a bit, what we see here is X402 OpenClaw plugin. And also here we can enable it. And also if we expand this, we see here our own enable plugin option, and also that string field here where we can add our endpoint. So if we copy this real quick from our postman that we used earlier, then we can also paste it here. Then we can just click save, and then you will see that our gateway once again restarts. And now what you can do is go to the raw overview, and this is just the same file as we have here. So go back to our codebase. That OpenClaw JSON file is the same file as you see here under raw. If you scroll down now all the way, then we have these plugins here, and it says X402, which is enabled true, and also our config is set, and it is enabled, and then that API endpoint. That's also what I refer to here in the documentation. You can or set that manually here at that location, or you can use the gateway dashboard. So that's up to you how you do that. Now, besides that, what we need to do is also make sure, since this is not a official plugin, that we allow that we whitelist it, you could say. That you can do here also under plugins, and then under plugins allow list, we can add one, and it's just called X402. So this is the ID of our plugin, and also that you can save. Every time you save this, you will see that our gateway is starting. Now you can always confirm it by going to raw, and then you can scroll down, and now you can see here plugins allow X402. Now if we go back to our actual code base, what we can do now here is type plugin, then or better OpenClaw plugin. You'll see that also our plugin will be listed. So we can close this for now here. And if we wait, plugins, I believe it's plugins, that plugins list. Also, you see here, it was already saying something about our plugin, but here you can see X402 OpenClaw plugin is loaded. So what we can do now is start testing our actual plugin. So first, what we'll do is open once again our Telegram here, and remember this slash command that we still have here. We can just try to use that now. And as you can see, it already replies to us here. The current source location of the X402 plugin is here, and the plugin is designed to fetch discovery resources. So this is the slash command that we actually registered here, remember? So if you go back to the index file, Then we have that slash command, I believe, here. So this is the message. Show the current source location of the X402 plugin. That's also what we see. So we know that our slash command is actually working. Now we can do many more things. Again, I have that readme file here. So if you want to test it out, it says here OpenClaw X402 discover. This is the actual command that we registered. So also here we can do OpenClaw type X402 just like that. And we should get back some help. As you can see here, get back help with all the comments that we can use. And if you type OpenClaw X402 cover like that, you will see that it goes and discovers or start fetching this. And this is what you can see here. So it fetches that information from that endpoint that we specified, and then it formats it and also outputs it how we wanted it specified in our format function. Remember, that is what you can see here under the utils. I believe we had that formatter. Here you can see exactly, we says here the resource URL type last updated. That's what we see here. So we know that our formatter function is also working. Now, besides that, we can also interact with the gateway method. So what we can do here is copy this like OpenClaw gateway call, and we can try to use that gateway method. So if we clear this terminal real quick, we can paste that and say OpenClaw gateway call X402 discover. And also this will return to us that information via the gateway. However, here you see that the formatting is not ideal, but we can see that our gateway method is properly working. Now, finally, we can also use that tool that we registered. Remember the X402 Discover tool. So if we go back to the index, we registered a tool, and this is ideally if we want to interact with that LLM. So once again, we can go back to our Telegram chat and we can say, hey, use this tool. And we can say X402 Discover. Now, this is an LLM, so it will interpret it as he wants. So he might not necessarily return all the information to us directly, and we need to be more specific on what we want. So as you can see here, so if we make this a bit bigger, it actually fetched that information because he knows what it is about. He says, I discovered a wide range of X402 resources available through the discovery tool. And then it gives some kind of summary. However, it doesn't really reply to us with all the resources. Remember, we are talking to an LLM. It does its own thing with the functionality that it has access to. So let me also try here in the actual chat. So also here we can chat with our LLM, and what we can do is say, use the X402 Discover tool and just print out the actual raw response here. So also here we can try that. As you can see now, if we are really specific how it needs to use that tool, it starts listing all these resources here, as you can see. For now, we can just stop that, as we know that this tool is also working. And we now showcased some of the actual methods that we registered. And I hope this gives you a bit of a better idea how you can create a plugin. Once again, you can get the code via the link in the description and start changing a bit within the plugin or the starter code base, and then eventually build your own plugin. If you have questions, like always, put them in the comments. I will do my best to answer them as quick as possible. If you want to have them answered quicker, I will also put a link from my Discord server in the description. You can always join there. I will make a specific channel or OpenClaw or AI agents in general, and then we can also chat there about all this great stuff. So that's it for now. I hope you think it was interesting, and I'll see you in the next one.